Awesome.
I think I think I'm good. I've got all the toys. Well, I've got some of the toys. All
Some
of
of
the
the
toys is too
toys.
many.
Yeah, because I wanted you to be the first one for this new session of. I'm calling this show the DNA of music, right? So, like, it's the people that are making it and what makes the music of different places. But then I wanted to start with you, this in quarantine version, because all musicians from around the world are basically. Uh, they're supposed to be non-essential personnel, or at least they're supposed to be at
Yeah.
home working. So I thought, why not share like all the stories and share how people are doing? So let's start off with Mr. Demetrios Petsalakis. Thank you for being on the show today. And one thing, the first thing I wanted to ask, because you are one that plays what, I don't know how many instruments you play.
Well, a few different ones, but they're kind of similar categories.
Uh-huh. Yeah, like so it's basically you play a lot of like string instruments, right? From around the
Yes,
world. Yeah.
mostly string instruments and lately some electronic
Right.
instruments,
And
but
percussion. You
mostly and percussion. Yes, string,
yes.
percussion. That's it. Nothing that involves breathing.
Yeah, yeah, I feel you there. I tried to play a supilka and a tin whistle once, and then it's not for me. At least maybe in a few years. So just tell a little bit like about you. I know you are from like from Greece, but you live in Toronto. So do a little like rundown of like your like background and all that stuff.
So I was born in Greece. I grew up in Greece my whole life, and well, not my whole life until I was 20.
Hmm.
But my parents were academics, so they every 6 years they got the opportunity to travel for a year. So I've always had a connection with leaving Greece, like even as a kid. The first time I was 4 years old, my parents came to Ottawa. That was the first time I left home. Then we went to Oxford, England for a year when I was 8. And so, like as a young kid, I was always I was acquainted to leaving Greece and like seeing other places. So I
Hmm.
got to travel a lot, and we got to play a lot of music because my parents really enjoy music, although they didn't play a note and they still can't play anything. But they always enjoyed going to see music, like classical music and especially classical, I think, but also other types of like traditional music. And they loved music. They wanted us to learn music, so we did the classical piano when I was
Hmm.
very young, when I was
Hmm.
4 years old. And other than so, like music has always been a part of my life, but I don't know. I got a little unfocused.
Yeah, well, it's the story of many world musicians, right? It's like you go do you
Yeah.
have too many interests, so you start going on different tangents. But I didn't know you started with piano, but then so like traveling around until you're 20, but until you're 20 in Greece, did you were you studying any other instruments there? Like how was that
Yeah,
going?
so I hated playing piano because
Hmm.
it was a very strict conservatory
Hmm.
in Greece. It was they used the Russian method or what they called, where
Hmm.
they were extremely strict. We did two lessons a week, and then we had a 2 hour theory lesson right after. And we did
Hmm.
that from when we were like very young. And at that age, you don't even know why you're really doing things.
Hmm.
So, I mean, I'm very glad I did it now because now I play a lot of keyboards again and stuff like
Oh,
that. And it's always
right.
been
Hmm.
useful my whole life. It's turned out to be a very useful thing that I did. But at the
Uh-huh.
time, I wasn't really enjoying myself and it wasn't really doing anything for me. It was just another chore, like
Hmm.
another school thing.
Hmm.
But when I was 8 years old, um, I asked for an instrument called Bouzouki
Hmm.
from my parents, and then I started playing Bouzouki when I was 8. So
Hmm.
that was my first. Traditional music is always around, right? When you're in the tradition, it's like always around, so you're always hearing it, you're always singing the songs. But I didn't play any traditional music until that time, and because I had all that background in classical music and ear training and education,
Hmm.
I picked it up really fast and I got really into it because
Hmm.
I guess it wasn't really what my parents wanted me to be playing.
Right.
So like you can practice your bouzouki once you finish practicing your piano, you know, kind of thing. It was like my video game. and I really got obsessed. Like as an 8-year-old, I would practice like 4 or 5 hours a day.
Oh wow.
And then my parents got me a teacher who was a great guy, Spiros Vitalinos. At the time, I think he was like 21 or 22.
Mm-hmm.
And he was a very interesting guy to take lessons from because he was young. He was very passionate about playing the instrument. But also, he was married to a Bulgarian woman.
Oh.
And that exposed him to all this Balkan music
Mm-hmm.
from Bulgaria and from like Serbia. So even at that age, we would be playing. I would be studying with him, and he'd say, "Hey, I'm working on this Balkan music stuff that I learned from my wife. Here's a tune." So even though I had traditional training in Bouzouki from him, and we did all the Greek music because he saw I had an interest in learning.
Mm-hmm.
He exposed me to all these other sounds of sounds, and at the time I just thought it was a cool tune
Mm-hmm.
that he showed, and we would just learn and practice. So I was exposed to all sorts of different music from a young age. And then when I decided I wanted, well, I started hanging out with people and playing traditional music, but then I had a bunch of friends who were into rock and roll. So I picked up a guitar,
Mm-hmm.
and then we started jamming with friends on electric guitar. I still studied bouzouki and piano up until I was 15, 16,
Mm-hmm.
that age. I think my mom allowed me to quit piano when I was 16, so I did as soon as I could.
Gladly.
She's like, okay, now you can decide if you actually like this or not, and I guess you
Oh
don't. But I still played bouzouki, but as soon as I play guitar, you're hanging out with friends or you're jamming all night. And then we had the studio space at in the meat market in Piraeus. I think we paid like each like 40 or 30 euros each. There was like maybe 8 of us
oh wow.
that we would just hang out there, like friends that would. I mean, it was like just imagine a bunch of 17-year-olds, 18-year-olds. They like
Mm-hmm.
rent this place in the meat market, which shuts down at 8. So you can go after
Oh.
8 p.m. and go in the building that's like falling apart because it's like those James Bond movies or those movies where they go into the markets and they get lost. So
Mm-hmm.
that's what it was during the day, but at night there's no one there,
Oh
right?
wow.
So you can go and you can play music until 6 in the morning, 5 in the morning, where they start coming back.
Oh
So you could
wow.
go at 8 p.m. It would cost us, I think, 120 euros a month, the room.
Oh wow. Of course, no one's using it, so why not, right? It's.
Yeah, well,
Oh
people were using it as studio spaces, actually. Like, we weren't the only ones there.
oh,
Because there
wow.
was these old buildings on the port. They used to use them for, I guess, back in the day, there's offices, like lawyers or like people that needed to get the papers done or like administration stuff for the port. Now
Mm-hmm.
the port got big and then the building got old and they left it and turned into, places with history. They have all sorts of
Rules, regulations. Yeah,
recycled spaces, that
yeah.
change and they become other stuff. And it's right by the train too. So the train there, like I use when you come, I'll show you.
Hmm.
How
Cool.
about that?
And this is all in Greece, right? In Greece,
In Greece,
in Athens.
in Athens, well, technically in Piraeus. I lived in
Okay.
Athens,
Mm-hmm.
but I had a little scooter.
Mm-hmm.
You could get in Greece at 16. You can get this little scooter. It's
Oh,
50 cc.
nice.
So I used to go everywhere with that thing. You can't
oh,
imagine.
oh, I
And
could.
it's just time I had. You just go
Yeah,
me for hours. You can get anywhere you want.
it's
You,
amazing.
you don't have to walk, right? And so we'd go down there. My friends lived in Piraeus. Piraeus is like the port close to Athens. It's
Okay,
really now it's like connected, like one big thing, but it's technically a different
a different like
city.
city. Uh-huh, cool. And so there you were like playing more like rock and roll. You were saying like I think it's so funny
Yeah,
that
whatever.
yeah, like even like
Just hanging out, playing.
yeah, like in
Just
this
hanging out and
age,
making loud noises.
yeah, that's
And
great.
then I decided I went to school for physics,
Mm-hmm.
but I didn't like it. I ended up practicing guitar all day and not going, basically. And then I was like, I want to play music. So I was like, I'm gonna go to Canada. And the reason I came to Canada was because my mother moved here when she was very young.
Mm.
When she was 13, her family moved here, and she grew up here from 13 to 30.
Oh, okay. Hmm.
So, well, I had some uncles here. Well, fortunately, they've passed away.
Mm.
I have an aunt left here, and that's why she's like, okay, if you're gonna leave Athens, because I didn't want to stay in Athens, you go to Toronto, where I know it's a good place. You know, you have some family there, and my mom knew of Toronto, and she knew that like it's a city where you can come here and you'll be fine.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I came. I went to school for university here for guitar, and
Hmm.
did the whole thing, and
So,
here I am.
but then did you like you studied physics? Like I studied physics too. Like we talked about this before. But then you went when you went to Canada. Did you like bring some credits and finish with a different degree, or how did you navigate that
I started from beginning.
from beginning? Hmm.
They gave me half a course credit for science.
Hmm. Cool.
I
And
did math.
at home you were basically like you speaking Greek, or did you have like some training in English specifically, or because you have no accent, so.
I have a bit of an accent, but at first, when I first moved here, it was hard actually. And it's not just the language, it's like people's mannerisms,
Hmm.
people's humor.
Hmm.
Like, I just didn't get it. Like, I didn't, like, the social interactions are different.
Hmm.
It's different, it's a different cultural context. Like, people are the same, but they react different to things. And that was the biggest problem. Like,
Hmm.
because they'll say something and you're like, what the hell does that mean? And it's like
Yeah.
a reference from something,
Hmm.
or like something stupid that I don't know, or
Yeah. And they like puns a lot, so sometimes you were like, I don't get. Yeah, it's just having done sort of the same thing. I just went to Canada when I was 30, not when I was 20. So I remember having all sorts of like the same impression, like because yeah, it's just a different thing. So sometimes you think you're being very clear in one way that you are speaking, and then they understand completely different because that's not how you would approach that idea on the language. It's just the
exactly.
way it was.
And also like the humor back home in Greece, it's like dark.
Hmm.
Like, we have dark humor, and it has to do a lot of with like poking at other people, like you're
Hmm.
just messing with them. Where
Yeah.
here it's like that's almost considered rude.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like it's more goofy. The humor here is more goofy versus there it's more like you're trying to get a reaction, sort
Yeah.
of.
Yeah. And I
At
think
least the
yeah, in
at
Brazil
least the
it's
crew
sort of the
that I was
same.
hanging out with.
Sorry.
I said at least the crew that I was hanging out with there, my friends there, it's
Hmm.
more like, and also like that when you're home, I have friends that I've had since I was, you know, a child. You're very comfortable with them,
Hmm.
you know. The
Yeah.
comfort level is you don't even realize how comfortable you are with these
Yeah.
other humans,
Hmm. Yeah. It's
until you don't have them around.
Yeah, and then so you study like guitar, but then I know that you study like some jazz and some stuff like that. So there, like in your in guitar, you started like learning specifically jazz, or it was more of a, like a
So the school
classical.
it was a jazz program. It was a
Hmm.
jazz undergrad, and then at York University, and then I did my master's at U of T
Hmm.
for jazz guitar, which was, although I play guitar obviously,
Hmm.
but not specifically jazz per se guitar. It like everything that I do is kind of informed from the different kinds of schooling, because when you go to like in jazz music, they have a way of dissecting things and analyzing them. Same with classical and figuring out how to approach the learning of
Hmm.
something new, or how to take a piece, dissect it, and learn from it. That's basically I think
Hmm.
the big thing that I got from playing.
Hmm.
I mean, jazz is beautiful too, but there's a lot of jazz musicians here.
Right, yeah, that's the other thing that I wanted to segue into because like you were in Toronto and I'm going to interview a lot of like our friends and fellow colleagues that are in Toronto and I find that in Toronto maybe there are other cities that are like that too, but there's literally people from everywhere and especially I guess in the last what maybe 10 years with there's slowly being a gathering of people that are interested in both mixing cultures and actually exploring specifically, like, or you get someone that is from Afghanistan or from Pakistan, and then you go, or a lot of Persian musicians there, so you can go and really see from the closest to the source that you can. There are people that are sort of like almost world class at their level, and then you can learn all those things, not just someone that learned from someone else, like second, third hand. Sometimes you can get really cool, like traditional music, and opportunities to play around with different things, right? So how did that
Yeah.
start for you? Like how like going from guitar, and I know we're going to show and to talk about the other
So
instruments,
for
but
me, I went to because I played traditional Greek music before as a kid, and I played bouzouki, and I had my bouzouki with me always.
mm-hmm,
And one of my trips when I went back to Greece, I bought an oud because I saw the oud. So this is probably like 2008 or 2009 at this point.
mm-hmm,
And I bought the oud, and then I started playing oud, and I came back, and then as soon as I started playing oud, there was a lot of demand for it for gigs. And
mm-hmm,
at first, I just played like one tune here and there because I had these gigs where I would play mostly still in the world music scene,
mm-hmm,
um, but I would play mostly guitar, and then for a couple of tunes, I'd play oud, like something simple, like a little
mm-hmm,
melody, and people liked it. And I was like, oh, this is awesome. And I started getting into it. I was like, oh, this is really awesome. But I found like there was it's it's a whole different style of playing and a whole especially the oud because although I played traditional Greek music, there I didn't go through formal like I had my lessons on bouzouki where you play the songs, you learn the instrument, and it's not very formalized. A lot of
mm-hmm.
bouzouki players when I was learning it, my teacher could read, but they couldn't even read music.
Yeah.
So it was a very informal, like oral tradition. You learn the instrument, you play it. Now things have changed, obviously, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
2020, but at that time, so what I needed was some kind of structure to learn the oud better. So I found out about Bassam Bishara,
Mm-hmm.
who's my teacher and your teacher,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
anyway.
Yeah.
And I started taking lessons with him, and he was very inspiring. He's an inspiring guy,
Yeah.
and he really treats his students like he's his disciples almost.
Mm-hmm.
So he gave me a lot of work, and I studied a lot for many. What was it, 3 or 4 years? Almost, I went like weekly
Oh
to
wow.
his house, and I studied with him. And then the more I worked, and then I played, work, you know, and then
Mm-hmm.
here we are,
Yeah, that's amazing.
basically.
So you, in terms of traditional music, started with the bouzouki and then went into the oud. So I guess this would be a cool segue for us to show people, like as I mentioned, like one of the things that I wanted to do with this show is sometimes people see like us playing or like friends or like other instruments, and then they ask me about, or they actually try to tell me, "Oh, have you seen this instrument? I bet you haven't seen it." It's like, oh, sometimes I haven't, but having been in Toronto, you've seen all sorts of like different
Yeah,
instruments that you don't see. So maybe we can show a little bit of the wood for in case
yeah.
people haven't seen. So
Well, I have it right here.
awesome!
I
Yay!
realize I have my bouzouki too. I should also,
Yeah,
but it's
we'll do that too. Let's start with the wood. Do you want to? Can you put your camera tiny bit down so that can you just a tiny bit so that we can sort of like show around?
does that
Yes,
work?
that's great. That's perfect. Yeah.
That's really good.
Yeah. So we should like just mention to people that unlike we're gonna show later with like a bouzouki and other instruments, like it's an instrument that doesn't have like with the guitar, it doesn't have frets, right?
Yeah, it
S-
doesn't have frets, and
eh,
the reason that is so it allows you to tune differently.
yeah, that's
You can hear that noise.
yeah, that's one of the things that like a lot of people that I try to show like music from different parts of the world. One of the main things that happen with, especially I guess with like Turkish Arabic, possibly Greek, but like it's that they have the scales that are not the traditional Western scales of major, minor. They're like tempered like from tempered instruments that were used, I think, to be able to transpose things from one tune to the other. And in these kinds of things that go back thousands of years, right? They are able to do this in between notes, and then whenever you have an instrument like the oud or the violin, you can get to those sounds. That's why it sounds so almost unfamiliar if you're not used to listening to that kind of music, right?
Yeah. I think most of the times, if you're not familiar with it, you're not even going to notice it.
Mm.
It's more of a tuning thing. It's more like instead of hearing that second step of the scale high, you hear it a little bit lower. And it has to do largely with the overtone series and the way it lays out. And also the fact that in this style of music, there was no harmony. So
Right.
everything is based on the melodic structure. So when you're basing everything on the melodic structure, then of course you're gonna start messing around with the tuning and see what happens. It's just a part of experimentation. You're like, why should I play that note at that pitch? Why
Mm.
can't I play it a little bit lower? And that's
Right.
how you get all these different ways of getting through melody versus what you were talking about, Western music. It's kind of they created this symmetrical system that allows you to kind of travel inside the piece into different tonalities. That would be the
Right.
fastest and easiest way to explain it.
Yeah, it's one of those things that is always strange to get, like especially people that are classically trained or they're just like pop Western music trained, for them to get into because they really can't do like harmonies, right? Because it won't work. And but you have this other ways of getting, like one thing that I know you do like very well too is this idea of that you get the music from, like you get one instrument starts doing something with the melody and then another instrument comes and comments on that thing or finish each other's sentences, right? Like that's how I try to portray people. It's like as if you like we finish the sentence at the same time, that kind of a thing, and one person introduces one idea to the other, and then it grows, which is what to me is the main thing. One thing about the oud that if you can show like the I know that besides it's like a plucking instrument, right? But I know that you can do a lot of like glissandos and people do like vibratos and they do
Think about
so
the oud.
yeah on the oud like you can do a lot of like different sounding let's say treatments to the notes, right? I just wanted to show people
Well,
a little bit of that.
you're talking about ornamentation. So
Yeah,
because
that's
a lot of the, especially the Ottoman classical music, they would have a melody. So let's say this is a famous
mm-hmm.
tune. It goes. That's the first phrase. So when you read it, that's exactly what they have, but you're expected to do something else with it, like. So when you study this style of music, the classical, Middle Eastern, or Arabic, or classical Ottoman, blah blah blah, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
depending on what government you want to pay tribute to.
Right. That's exactly it. Oh. Mm-hmm.
It has to do with how you approach the note. Like, am I gonna play? Am I gonna play? I'm not gonna play. I'm gonna go. It also has to do where you're coming from, where you're going, what kind of sentiment, what kind of mood, what's your technical ability,
Right.
what can you pull off. Sometimes, like for example, we have a lot of open string. These open strings, this string is very important because you
Mm-hmm.
could do stuff like. And it's really all about ornamentation because when you're playing in an ensemble, everybody's playing technically the same notes, but you actually might not be. You're kind of just following the same. It's like if you're going through to walk through a path, like in
Mm-hmm.
a forest. There's the paths there. That's your music that you're reading. But like, do you have to be in the center of the path? Do you want to be on the side of the path? Do you want to walk off a little bit, go into the bush because you saw a nice flower, and then come back? And it's like
Mm.
we all walk together through the path, and that's
That's a great way to say it. I really like it. It's very cool. Yeah, because and that's one of the things that I think I was talking to my dad, and we were talking about like music that I grew up listening, like for example Pink Floyd, like, and then I don't know how many times I watched Roger Waters play The Wall, which is one of the best shows ever, but I was they play exactly like it was in the recording, or exactly like it was supposed, like it was done, including all the like all the feelings and everything is at a specific part, and I think that's much less common in like I guess in Arabic music. Arabic, as we're saying, like
Well, the thing
whoever,
about Pink Floyd too is that when they came out with their crazy production, basically,
yeah.
the criticism that they got was that they won't be able to play it live, right?
Oh, I didn't know that, huh?
Yeah,
Yeah.
part of the criticism was like, okay, you did this crazy shit, but are you gonna be able to play this live? And
I didn't know that. And then you're like, every day I'll show you.
yeah,
Oh, change my mind about that. That's cool.
I think that's definitely like a part of it,
Uh-huh.
of them just, and also like Western music, right? Even rock and roll, in many ways, although there's the more jammy vibes, obviously,
Yeah.
but like most contemporary shows, pop music or anything, is played exactly the way it's played every night.
Yeah.
And that comes from direct the fact that, classical music,
Mm-hmm.
like as much as you think you're not, I mean, it has influences, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
But our way of thinking, is the show, like a show, make it tight, make it everything exactly the same. Everybody knows.
Yeah. Yeah.
Most people are used to listening to music like that. Not but a lot of people, let's say a lot, not most.
Yeah.
And it comes from that,
Huh.
I think.
Yeah, and that's interesting. And in a way, like even with like Arabic music, I always, or like music from different places, I usually prefer to see like, okay, I know this tune, I've heard it, I don't know how many times, but I want to see how you do it, right? And what's your influence, and not only your influence, but your influence that day, right? Because I don't know, like had a
Yeah.
few more beers or crazy venue or whatever, you're going to feel in one way. Or if you're like this tight group that can really like sync, you have a new musician that comes in and everybody's like, let's get you like up to speed and let's get each other's back and try to play around. So I think that's, in a way, it's probably very related to jazz in a way, like that people like to improvise and like to explore different things. But I find that in, let's say, quote unquote, world music, there is this thing of, or specifically like Arabic, Turkish music, you have this thing that you really want to like showcase your, it's sort of like there is a lot of virtuoso talent to it, but it's at the same time I want to see your emotion, I want to see what you bring to the
I think I
table.
think it's in all styles of music.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the putting yourself in the music,
Oh, for sure, yeah.
the Arabic and Middle Eastern classical music, even Greek music, um, that is it becomes a big part of what you do because that's how the music is laid out. It's like if you just play the notes on the page, there's no point.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's what your teachers tell you. The teachers tell you don't just play the notes on the page. It's not the whole thing. So there's a whole school of thought through that. But it's important to understand that, like, but even in classical music, right?
Mm-hmm.
The way they approach the piece, each musician still pours themselves
Oh, of course,
in it,
yeah, yeah.
but it's on a different I guess it's a different aesthetic that people are listening for.
Oh, for sure,
For
yeah.
example, versus did you capture what they thought the composer was, or did you, how much of yourself, how did you, it's in a way it's funny because they are, it's like culture, right? In the end, we're all the same, but like kind of different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So
and
I've
even
had
like,
the opportunity to study all the different styles, a lot of different styles of music,
mm-hmm.
and and a lot of them approach learning for sure very differently. They approach performance differently, but in the end, it's got to sound good.
Right. Yeah, and so let's get into that a little bit. So, like, you started learning the oud, and then you started playing a lot of it, and then you started getting into percussion, other instruments, and all that. Maybe we can show, just to contrast with the oud, your, like, if you have it laying around, your bouzouki, so you can showcase.
So this
Mm-hmm.
this is my Bouzouki that I had since I was 10.
Oh, cool.
So when I was 8, my dad bought me a very cheap one.
Uh-huh.
And then when I got a little bit older and I was
Mm-hmm.
10, I saved all my pocket money.
Right.
Actually, I used to do these choir gigs, and so because I went to this classical conservatory thing, they taught us how to read and sing notes.
Right.
So what it ended up doing is my teacher, he made this group of 4 kids. It was me and other 3 kids, and we would do these choir. So if you needed a children's choir for your song, or if you needed a children's choir for ads and stuff like that,
Mm-hmm.
we would go in. Because they were working with kids, the guys would book the studio all day, right? Because they're like, we have literally 8-year-olds singing, 7-year-olds, so we need to give them time to get the. But we'd go there. We were like at 8 years old, you've been taking no like lessons for like 4 years,
Oh,
so you could
wow.
like sight read. So they would like literally just throw the chart at us, and then we would just nail the part in half an hour.
Oh, wow.
And then the studio would get paid all day and stuff. So they loved us. So I made a bunch of money as an 8-year-old singing ads for
Oh,
like
that's awesome.
kids.
We should
And
dig
then I
that
bought
up.
this guy.
Oh,
It's a
great.
little rusty,
Yeah,
but
no, it's the so just to compare, like this, of course, has the frets, so just
it
like a
has
guitar.
frets. So this one, so in Greek music, we in the rebetiko music, we play
Mm-hmm.
bouzouki. We don't play commas, what we call the intervals in between.
Mm-hmm.
I just say I know you know it, but I'm just
Yeah, no, no,
explaining
you
it.
have that's the idea is to get people to. I will probably learn some stuff, but the idea is to
Yeah.
share like all these instruments and all those things, like in conversations that people can learn. But yeah.
So around the 40s, 30s, 40s, and 50s, there was a huge movement from the government to
Mm-hmm.
detach the culture from the Turkish culture,
Mm-hmm.
right? So they literally legislated they would go and if something sounded too Turkish, they wouldn't let it be released. So
Mm-hmm.
there was a consistent tendency towards moving towards a tempered scale and the
Yep.
Western classical. So there's music. Traditional music was considered of less importance and of less what's the word I'm looking for?
Gravitas. It's like a yeah, it's like a lower class kind of a thing. Like oh, you have
Yeah,
this
it's a lower.
high culture, and this is low
Yeah,
culture that we
and
don't
when
talk
it
about.
started, Bouzouki especially, it actually I don't know if you want to call it lower class, but definitely music of the poor people.
Purple, yeah, 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 like popular. Hmm.
And you know, so this is what you get. If you see this instrument actually, I was like, it
Hmm.
has. I don't know if you can see. There's like 2 marks right here.
Let's see. Uh huh.
These are for
Yes.
my first dog. I had the Bouzouki sitting there, and he went on there. He was like,
And it will be there forever. That's so
"It'll
funny.
be there forever. The dog's not there."
Uh, the
Maybe I should play a little bit the different vibes.
yeah, for sure.
That'd be like this is like an intro for a very
Hmm.
famous song. Verses. If you
Hmm.
hear the oud, it would be something more like. it's a different sound, obviously,
Yeah.
but you can see how they're kind of the same family. They're related. And this instrument, the oud in Greece, you'd find it on the islands and old rebetiko like Svirneko, called the
Hmm.
old school, which people like Rosa Eskenazi and Dudas, who's a very famous composer that wrote early Svirneko, we call it music,
Hmm.
and there's many singers and from that era, especially from the migration from Asian Minor that brought a lot of music from
Uh-huh.
there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so there is a lot of like, especially I know that there are like, you're talking a little bit about this idea of like, and I didn't know this about the bouzouki, very interesting, because there is equivalent things that happened in Ukraine with, which is where I am at right now, but like even that they, when the Soviet Union started, they actually changed the bandura. The people that the thing that people play bandura today is the Soviet version, which was the same thing, which is to make the all the scales be more of the like Western style and to be like everybody will play like the same. And if you get there are museums here, and I am sure it's the same for bouzouki's, that they sound very different. They even have sometimes a little bit more of options of sounds that you can do with the older styles. So it's interesting to see. I didn't know this about the bouzouki. And the one thing that I wanted to know, like about that, like so, there's a lot of music that, and we played this before together, but it's interesting. Like some tunes, they, especially the older ones, they you have it in Turkey, you have it in Greece, you have sometimes in Bulgaria or other places. You have like in the Arabic world, they have their version. So can you talk a little bit about how, like, especially because you probably have even more knowledge of this in the Greek part of this, like these tunes that appear sometimes even translated, like the melody is the same, but they have versions in
Yeah.
different cultures.
So the problem with all these kind of conversations is politics.
Right.
So the thing is, in reality, music doesn't care about politics or borders or anything of that nature.
Yeah.
And at the time when a lot of the music, uh, before the First World War, really in the
Hmm.
area in Greece, populations were way more mixed than people like to admit.
Right.
Like even now, I would say, but
Hmm.
like
But there is
we're
this
in
myth
Istanbul, there
of
was like a
purity.
big
Yeah.
Greek population, there was a big Armenian population, there's a um, Turkish population,
Right.
obviously.
Hmm.
But there's also like people from like Syria and
Right.
Lebanon, obviously everywhere. That whole area of I guess what used to be Ottoman Empire, but not only just because it's just chronologically and historically, there's
Right.
people from around the world that live there. So of course, if they hear a catchy tune, they're gonna put, you know,
Their
the
spin on
tunes.
it.
They're collective tunes, really.
Right. Yes.
Just because there's a different, the same way you would sing it in a different language would be like I play it on oud and then I play it on bouzouki or I play it on zura or I play. It's like the words are just like another instrument that you choose to play the tune in, and you put your own words and whatever.
Yeah.
People want to have a good time. A good tune is a good tune. You slap some of yourself in it. Every time you play a tune, you put some of yourself in it. And if you're speaking Greek, that's going to be in Greek. And if you're speaking Turkish, that's going to be in Turkish. And if you're speaking Sephardic, like
Yeah.
Sephardin or
Hmm.
Ladino, I should say,
Ladino. Yeah.
then it's going to be probably in some kind of weird Spanish, you know.
Right. Yeah.
But
Yeah. It's
that's just music.
yeah.
That's the way it is, you know.
Yeah. And I
Happy
think
birthday. Like how many different languages do you have this happy birthday? All Greeks we have a different happy birthday.
oh yeah.
Like same melody, all these different words. Who wrote happy birthday? I don't
Yeah.
know.
Well, actually, you know what? The funny thing about Happy Birthday is that someone supposedly holds the copyright to the melody. So sometimes when you play it live, they will try to claim it, which is kind of
Okay.
funny. Yeah? That's one of the things that is kind of interesting too. Like just to before we get into like other instruments, but because I know that for you, you have the cool thing about this three combination of three things that musicians do, and I think it's interesting for people to know. Especially for, let's say, someone looks at the oud or to the bouzouki or whatever, it's like, oh, that's so rad, let me like check it out. there is like, as you were talking about, ways of learning, right? And I remember like when I was learning drummer with a master drummer like in Toronto with like Suleiman, it was like really strict, trying to really get you to play and put you in like very, let's say, trial by fire places, which is like, okay, you learn, you can do backup, go on stage and we'll learn the tune as you play, and I'll yell at you if you make a mistake, that stuff. And then you have other ways of teaching, and I know that for you, you have like, you can read music, you do like you have that advantage, so you can read and write and all that and have a good ear, but you can improvise too. And one thing that I've noticed with a lot of musicians, if they sort of like, if they learned like Arabic or Turkish style, that they sometimes they don't know how to read, but they can really improvise and feel and hear, and they do a lot of stuff. But then you can't read, and some people that read, they feel terrified about improvising, and or they sometimes don't know how to do it, or they think it has to be perfect. Can you talk a little bit about that from your experience?
Yeah, well, from my experience, what ends up happening is this: people commit a lot of time and years to learn an instrument. Let's say you learned oud, okay?
Mm-hmm.
That took many, many hours and many times. And you learn how to play Arabic music, and you know your Arabic tunes, and you know how to play them. And now you meet someone else, and they're like, "Hey, I play completely different. I play jazz, and we need to improvise in this different tonalities where you don't play." Well, the thing about that is you're always so used to and so comfortable doing the stuff that you know that when you try to do something new, obviously you're not going to be able to do it perfectly right away. You got to commit the time and
Mm-hmm.
learn and push and come and
Yeah.
meet them halfway. And I've started, I've started many instruments from zero, like even
Mm-hmm.
like as a whatever. I'm like, you'll figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
So I know that it takes time. Every time you start something new, anything new from zero is going to take time. So if you spend your whole life reading classical music and playing it really well, the amount of commitment and the hours that you put in it, and you can do that really well, it you have it's a little bit of it's the ego. You got to
Mm-hmm.
bring down your ego and become a student again. You should
Mm-hmm.
always, I mean, it's a cliche, but you should try it. You should try to be learning new things, right? Put
Mm-hmm.
yourself out there, expose yourself, and then once you start improvising, of course, at first it's gonna be whatever. It's gonna be
Yeah.
what it's gonna be. And I
Mm-hmm.
mean, just because you think you're a good improviser now
You
doesn't
are.
mean
Mm-hmm.
anything,
Yes.
because
Mm-hmm.
what does that even mean? What does good improvise? What does that like? You know. So I think it has to do with comfort zone, people's comfort zones, and feeling like you know it's okay to suck a little bit. Nobody
Mm-hmm.
cares. You are the only person that cares if you don't sound good. So
Mm-hmm.
everybody else, I mean, you might not capture them with your amazing sound, but when you play music, they're not gonna yell at you or throw stuff at you, and maybe next time it'll be better. And that's how you. And I think that's the biggest problem. Now, if you don't have the time or the will to commit to it, then that's your fault.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's very very cool way to put it. And the other thing, like, because I said there was like three parts, so there's like being able to do like read and do that kind of stuff, then improvise and compose. Because I know that you write music too. So can you tell a little bit about your experience of like writing music? Because you have some tunes like for example, there is one tune that I even recorded a video that spring, like Primavera, that you did with Tamar, and I know that there is a lot of stuff that you did. So I know I really like the melody on that tune, and like how was your experience with composing music too?
So, and this is I've been through different stages of this because it's a different thing. What I've come to realize myself, or for me, is that the biggest thing about creating new art is your approach to the methodology.
Hmm.
For example, what do I mean by that? Um, where are you getting your material from? Where's your input coming from? Like, what's your vehicle for creation? So for that tune, actually, I wrote it on lyra,
Mm-hmm.
and what I was trying to do was I was trying to do this exercise for the bow that I was trying to work. And then I created this melody where I could have this open string. So I could hear the tuning and I could play this. And then as I played this melody, I created this melody form. And I was like, okay, now that I have a question, the first melody for me is kind of the question. What's the answer to it? And it kind of like, for there, if you just let it and you listen to what your head is telling you, it kind of it structures itself and it creates. And that's how I wrote that specific tune that you mentioned. But there's like all different ways in approaching composition, especially nowadays with electronic music, but not only. Like another way would be to take a form like a normal song. Say I want to write a song in a Samai song. Like Samai is the classical Arabic form for people that don't know. So that kind of gives you a template already, and then you start filling in the gaps, and then it creates, and that creates a different kind of song, you know. So so creation, it can be all sorts of things, and you can derive the inspiration from wherever you want. The one thing, if anybody wants any advice, they want to hear me say something about it, is don't try to write a good tune. Just try to write a tune. Just write a tune. And guess what? If it's not good, you don't have to play it. You know, and then write another one, and then write another one, and then write another one. And then when you find something and you think you like it, rework it a little bit. You're like, okay, maybe this is okay the way it is, but what if I also add this, or what if I take that away? Like, you know, play it with friends, see how it works. Like, try it out. I mean, that's just simple, you know.
Yeah,
if you're looking to start to write new things and you don't know how to start, think of it like you have to, you know, just in an hour, I need to play something for this, whatever. I need like 2 minutes of material. It doesn't have to be good. I just need 2 minutes of material. And then you work it. It gets you off your, because we put our composers we like, we put them in such high regard because they are, most of them. If you're playing a lot of times music for me that's 200 years old, guess what? It was a very good piece.
Right.
You know?
Yes, you're comparing yourself with it survive the test of time, right?
Yeah, like you're not gonna write something that's gonna survive 200. Maybe you will. I'm not gonna write something. At least I can't go in the state of mind that I'm gonna write something that's gonna survive 200 years. No way. I just need something. I just need a tune. Like, play, get the gig going, get the juices flowing, create something, and probably the thing that you're gonna create after it's gonna be better, or maybe not. You know, the more you work stuff, it's gonna be different, I would say.
Yeah,
and then it's more like of a personal journey, maybe.
No, that's a great advice, and I think it's cool. Like when people are, especially I think people that have already done this training and played all this like amazing music. Sometimes you're so intimidated, exactly from what you said, and I think that's a good antidote to that. Cool. So one thing we can do now, since you mentioned the lyra, is to continue our little journey and show the lyra.
So this is the.
That's the Cretan.
Cretan lyra. Here, I'll play you that tune.
No,
it's a little bit of tune.
That's no, but it's cool.
But yeah, it's not very traditional. But
and
this is a very popular instrument even now in Crete, which is an island south of Greece. It's kind of A normal ensemble would be a lyra and two lauta. Lauto is like an oud, but something between an oud and a bouzouki. That's a known tune.
Mm-hmm.
And they have these melodies. I mean, we could get into all sorts of, because
Yeah.
Crete has a very specific sound to it. The lira is a big part of it now, but it's also violin is very popular in the same format. And they have this. It's a social music. So it's music for social gatherings mostly. It has obviously developed, and they do very beautiful things now, and very formal things. But traditionally, it's tunes. People would show up for weddings and social gatherings. They would play. There's a big improvised dance, pre-improvised words called madinades, and they sing them. And it really captures the soul of the island and the culture, and they really support their music, and they love it. And there's some beautiful music coming from that island and singing.
That's amazing. And to get like just to show a little bit more of the instrument, so it has like it's 3 strings, right?
So it's 3 strings. Here, I'll bring it close. So the thing about it is, I don't know if you can see that the strings here are pretty high. So what happens is you play with your nail. You touch the string with your nail, and that's how you get the different words, the different notes.
Yeah, for people to know. Yeah. So instead of like more like other like with the violin, even that you or the oud that you press the string, you're using your nail to close that gap and basically create that note.
Exactly, and you get that sound that kind of.
Oh wow, that's cool. Yeah, it's so interesting how probably like if you're gonna see the genealogy of these instruments, they probably come from those sort of like something like a rababa, or they probably sorry, I should rephrase this. They probably have a common ancestor, right? That people brought to different places, and then in different places started like changing and doing different ways. Because even one thing, like it's just that to me it's so transparent, but it's interesting to show that violin is something that you play like this, right? Whereas this one you play actually vertically on your lap, and you can probably even walk around with it. I assume. I don't know if this one.
And
not really.
But you can. They put their feet. You have to put your foot up because you have to bring it up a bit.
Oh, I see.
But look, it's the same thing. People like to own things, but you don't own anything.
Yeah.
Right. What is this? This is. I can see this. This used to be a stick, obviously, with strings on, and they found you could pluck them. They found you could bow them. Right.
Right.
Someone's like, oh, I put the strings, but it was very quiet. So, and then they put a speaker. And sure, you get the rabab if you want to call it. But I'm sure a lot of people figured out that if you put a string on a stick and you bow it, it makes a sound. You want to call that lyra, you want to call it whatever you want to call it. It's like the same as drums.
Yeah.
I mean, they have a little bit of a different way and style of looking at things. But there's instruments like this where you play with your nail. Like in Poland, right?
Right. Yeah.
And Eastern Europe, they have instruments like this, exactly. So it's not like it's a global. People found out that if you bow strings, they make sound.
Yeah.
And they made all sorts of different variations, and some of these instruments got very popular. I think this specific one, the lyra, this is just my opinion, got popular because it's easy to make. And the tops that they used here, actually, they used discarded roofs from old houses back in the day.
Oh, it's amazing.
Which ended up being perfect wood because it was very slow growing cedar from Lebanon, which is very now it's kind of sought out for these instruments. But it was like if you dig out a back, you slap the top on it, and then you put the construction of it is very simple. It's durable, like it won't break. Like the violin in itself is a very finicky.
Yeah.
Not finicky, but the instrument
fragile.
itself is very complex. It's a complex instrument put together.
Right.
I mean, you could make them well or not, but you could make a shitty ones relatively easy.
Mm-hmm.
Where like if you want to make a shitty violin, like I challenge anyone to make a shitty violin easily, you know.
Right, right. Yeah.
Yeah, so people got what they played, and then they played it, then you hear it, and you're like, I need it to be loud and bright, so that when I play the wedding, they can hear me while they're
Mm-hmm.
shooting their guns right down there.
Right.
So that's how it ended up. It is loud. You know, they bow it, they learn. You can play melody, boom, boom, boom. It doesn't cost as much as a violin.
Right. So interesting.
You're good. You know, and then it catches on, and then it's like electric guitar.
Right. And that's one of the things that I find so interesting about this, like, especially the string instruments from different places. And I think you're going to show us, like, something else later, but it's like they, because of the material, like, if you're going to use this, wood from specific kinds of places, or if it has a specific shape, it's the way that you would modulate the sound to make, not modulate, to do I guess is the timbre that you would call, like the kind of quality of the sound. It's sort of like the way you would do a pedal, like today with electric things, you can get the clear sound of the string, and then you can create all sorts of
Yeah.
variations. Yeah, and then with this thing, it's sort of like built into the the actual like natural like
Like
skin.
evolution, right? Evolution is you come and it's like thumbs. Like we got thumb, but who was the first one to get a thumb? You know, it's the
Right,
same thing. It's like who takes credit for this stuff. It's like
right,
people are very, very obsessed with credit, and
right.
like I can tell you for sure, I did not come up with those.
Yeah, that's
100%.
yep. That's
Some people add little things, but you know, we have to. People always want to find their origin, and you know, and I think as we can find with this crazy virus too
right.
now, is like we're all kind of we can see how connected we all are. It's like where I'm dealing with the same problem that you're dealing with in Ukraine.
Hmm.
I mean, you know,
Yeah, it's that's a good point. Like uh, it's one of those things that you just realize. Sometimes you think your influence is so localized that you make no difference in the world, but you can imagine like the first person that there is even the story of like, not to get much into that things, but it's, I think it's important to segue a little bit into that. But like there was one person in Korea, it's, I think it's patient 31 or something like that, because they were tracking everybody, and then this person decided to just go around and go to a buffet and go to this, and then it spiked. And I think like the cool, as you mentioned, like this analogy of like, oh, where it just things travel, like music travel, and how to make instruments. And I think it's a good point about this the obsession with taking credit and saying this is ours, like this is my
yeah,
music and we are the best and all this. Unfortunately, it's sort of like when people don't get it. But I think one of the things that happens a lot, especially when you start getting, which is my goal with this like idea of talking to the musicians and getting their experience, is that you start seeing, as you said, like a lot of the music is sort of, we're all making music with our own like accents and influences and all those things. But when we learn things from other people, it's sort of like this virus that catches, right? But in this
yeah.
case, it's a good one. And is there any music? Because I know that you started like Greek and then like some Western traditional, and then you get into Arabic and all those things. And I know you did a lot of like Sephardic and a lot of flamenco tunes too with Ventanas and other groups. And you are one of those musicians that play with 1,400 bands, so you have that advantage of people really seeking out your knowledge, and at the same time you get a lot from them, and then you bring this. I call this the Demi virus, Demetrios virus. A very good one to have. No, but really, like, is there like so like the Balkan stuff that you're exploring? And I know that with one of your bands with Near East, you have even now influence from Indian music, right? Like we have
Yeah,
Ravi that plays
I mean, I
tabla.
haven't had actually. I guess now is the time I could and like go into it. And I played with Ravi Nampali, who's a tabla player and knows classical North Indian music very well.
Hmm.
But and also Ernie Tolar, who has studied a lot of classical
Hmm.
Indian music. I didn't study classical music, but I guess what I can get from osmosis from them. It's like
Hmm.
there's a there's close language to the Middle Eastern thing, but they hear things a little bit different, and the
Right,
way they structure the idea of the compos the composition being um, more of an expression of a state of mind. That's
right,
what it is. So when they like, it's like highly improvised, but also not. It's very in a very specific framework that describes a mood or a rag or that's. And I shouldn't be talking about this because I'm
no,
not.
but it's like, but my point is like, if people want to get like very, very specific information about specific things, they can always get. It's sort of like that's one of the things that you are exploring now, right? As far as I
Yeah.
know,
Well,
like
now
even if as
actually,
much as you can, like play a little bit, so you get a little bit of that sound in your music.
nowadays I've been exploring a lot of modern electronic music,
Hmm.
um, which is it's an amazing thing because you can create music by an abstract thought can turn into music, which
Right.
is unbelievable. But also, I've been playing with a lot of groups from like North Africa,
Huh.
like from like Algerian music.
Oh, that's great.
But
Hmm.
also, I've been playing with Ahmed Moneka, who is from Iraq, but he's of Kenyan descent, I
Mm.
guess. From so he has all these tunes that are in the Gulf from like that are a mixture of Afro, Arabic, like
Hmm.
very based on dance and beat. So that's kind
Hmm.
of what I've been into these days, like the last few years, a couple years. I've been getting more into, whatever opens, when someone's going to open a door for me and say, hey, you want to come in here and see what's happening here?
Hmm.
I, I'm going to go check
Oh,
it out.
yeah,
And then
that's great.
life, like, your career will tends to take you places that you did not expect or didn't even imagine were there, which is one of the amazing things of being a musician. Yep.
Hmm. Yeah, especially
So
in I guess in the context of Toronto that has all these interesting like influences. In a way, it's kind of like you're sort of like a bit separated geographically from other places. You really like if you want to go, you have to really take a plane and go and all those things. But at the same time, you have all those people that are congregated in one city, and you basically go in some jams and you have people with like 10 nationalities and
well, look at Kune. You know the band Kune that I played
right.
in,
Yes.
right? They
Yeah.
literally put together a group, 11 people from around the world, right?
Right.
Everybody's from a different country, landed immigrants here, and we're playing together, and it's a Royal Conservatory group. That's kind of what Toronto is turning into because there's so many people from, and uh, if you were born here, a lot of times your parents were not.
Right. Hmm.
So this is the idea of, and that's what I wanted to say. It's not Toronto is not that it's not just that there's all these people playing music that come from around the world that create this. There's also an audience that's been created that's a mix of people. So yes, of course, you go to these concerts where you're kind of like a little bit of a museum piece,
Hmm.
where it's
Yeah.
like this is the oud and this is how you play the oud and blah blah blah.
Hmm.
And oh, I've never seen an oud. That's really cool sounding. Cool. You know, but
Yeah.
also you start getting audiences being like, "Oh, that's an oud. I know what an oud is. That's awesome. Why is it Oh, so they're hanging out with a sitar player.
Hmm.
That's cool. I'd never seen the sitar before, but I know what the oud is. But the
Hmm.
guy next to me doesn't know what the oud is, but knows what the sitar is, or the girl or whatever,
Right.
gender
Yeah.
neutral term.
Yeah.
Um, so
Yeah.
that's like the people are starting because without the audience, you don't have. So there's an audience for it now, and there's the music for it and the demand for it, and we're just gonna develop and see how it goes.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think with this whole Corona thing, people staying at home and practicing, because that's going to be the natural tendency of a musician.
Right.
There's going to be all sorts of crazy music this summer.
Uh-huh. That's a good point. That's cool. Yeah, and that's how I want to get people in their pajamas and like chat and have a little bit of a little journey with their thoughts in music. So that's really cool. So you were going to show me, just to finish off, because we're getting like to about like an hour, but I can talk about this the whole like for a long time. And again, thank you so much for uh, joining me in
I'm
this
assuming you're gonna edit some of
international
this.
hang. Huh?
I'm assuming you're gonna edit some of this.
Oh yeah. We're gonna take out you walking around and all this.
Yeah,
Your
so it
performatic
won't be an
dance you
hour.
did in the
People will
middle.
hear my ramblings.
No, there are no ramblings. It's really cool. It's good. But I wanted you to see the. I wanted to see. You're going to show me another instrument. One I think that I don't
Oh,
know.
so this is the Juras. So I've been playing a lot of Bouzouki lately
Mm-hmm.
because I've been playing other things, and it's too predictable. No.
No, but that's unpredictable. I didn't even know this one. Hmm?
So this is Juras. So in the Bouzouki family, you have the Bouzouki that you saw.
Yes.
This is the middle size Juras.
Okay.
It's like a Bouzouki. Before they made the Bouzouki the way it is now, it was like this. It had three series of strings, and a lot of the
Oh.
music was more like a little less virtuosic, a little more like, you know,
Hmm.
guys singing that smoked a little too many cigarettes.
Yes, this
Yeah, this
like,
is a more older. I guess like it's not actually it's a newer instrument, but
but
it's a older style,
style. Yeah, it actually
which is
reminds
coming
me.
back too
Huh.
in Greece.
That's
Like very old style kind of, because the youth is starting to look into. Well, before this crazy crisis here, we had another crisis, an economic crisis,
hmm
where people in Greece felt like the Western system failed them
right.
culturally, I guess spiritually in a way,
Hmm.
though we have our own thing going on. And people started turning back into their tradition, their roots, their Middle Easternness, in a way, the
Hmm.
thing that the government was trying to hide basically from them.
Hmm.
Now they're starting to discover on their own.
Oh, that's really cool. Yeah, I didn't. I mean, I knew about the problem in Greece, but I didn't know how it influenced music in such a
Well,
profound
because
way.
there's a lot of people, all of a sudden being a musician is not that bad, because at
Right.
least you're making 50 euros.
Right, right.
No.
So, and it's sort of like probably what's happening now, even like that people, I see one of the things that I thought was so cool is like some people that were actually very shy to be more entrepreneurial and put out their like stuff out, they, including myself, even to that sense, like, okay, let's make things happen because we sort of have to like eat,
Yeah, man,
right?
I've been live streaming, and I've never live streamed before in my life. I had to
Right.
figure out how to do it.
Yeah. It's and that's another thing to we'll go back to like one other thing I wanted to ask you about this instrument, but there's another thing to mention is that you are doing this electronic music and these things, and it's good that you can do it at home because your wife is a musician as well, right?
Yes,
So,
it's very good. It's great, and it's also an outlet for us because you play music for an hour or two, and then you feel great. No
mhm.
matter
Yeah, no.
it's a whole different conversation about
Mhm.
the meditative state of being in when you're actually playing music, and the
Well,
benefits that it can have.
yeah, let's go there a little bit, like if you don't mind, like because I know that you're a very like thoughtful guy, and you're always like you take your practice like seriously, but you also really enjoy creating music. And I even seen like from the corner of my eye when we were playing, like if you see someone really going somewhere or taking us somewhere, I even see that like smirk. Oh, okay, we're going somewhere. So you appreciate that thing. So can you tell a little bit about this meditative or like let's say I could even, it's just not necessarily sometimes meditative, but sometimes even a different level of thinking. I can't explain without being woo, but like,
Well,
how do you feel like with this? Like, how does it take your mind?
so there's two different things with music. One is like when you're practicing. Practicing music is like a repetitive task, and it's not just music. I think you probably get it with anything, maybe like working out
Hmm.
or whatever.
How would we
But
know?
We know now.
But for sure, I know. Yeah. Yeah.
So what you do in this idea that you focus your mind on a task for a very long time, very long time. I find myself when I do something like that, if I do it for over half hour, just one thing, it's actually I would say an hour. But let's
Hmm.
do it for the novices. If you haven't done this before,
Hmm.
just practice one thing, say one piece again and again and again and again and again for 1 hour. Your head goes in and you start focusing, and then your mind spreads because you
Hmm.
start, but then you bring it back, and it's an exercise in, and then
Awareness, yeah.
and
Hmm.
then the point comes where you actually are in the piece. You're in the piece, especially when you do classical music. For this, for me, it's like if you're
Hmm.
practicing something like that, and your brain is focused, but you don't need to bring it in, you know.
Hmm.
And that to me, when you come out of that out of that
Yeah.
practice,
Hmm.
it's like meditation, I
Yes,
guess,
yes,
which
for
I
sure it
haven't
is.
tried,
Yeah.
but I assume it's a similar experience.
Yeah.
But then when you're performing and playing with other people, because you're not most of the times I'm not at least using verbal communication, so you're communicating in sound and you're focusing your conversation. It's an abstract conversation that you're having, so it's
Hmm.
not like, hey, you whatever. It's more like sound and sound and bring it together. And then when it's working,
Hmm.
like you feel like this elevated feeling, it's
Hmm.
feel when the music, like when you're at a party and the beats hits you just the right way, or
Yeah.
it's a
I
concert
know.
and then someone plays something and you're like, you know
Yeah.
it has to do. And for me, it's all about, like I said, it's like focus and attention and taking the things in and like really listening to it. It's like a conversation, right?
Hmm.
You actually listen to what your mom was saying. Probably have saved yourself a lot of pain, but you weren't focused, you know?
Yeah, but that's
It's like
the
if you're listening to music and you let it, sorry, this is a bad example, but if you listen to music and you let it do what it's doing and you focus, and then you can get so much from it. And then your brain kind of thanks you by giving you happiness and calm.
yeah, that's a good point, and that's exactly it. Like, and especially if you let the music change you in a way, like it's like let you take places, and that's one of those things that, as you were talking about the audience that is being built around these things. One of the things that I don't know if you have this experience in Greece, I certainly have in Brazil, with my friends that are more used to like listening to, let's say, Brazilian. In Brazil, it's basically Brazilian music and American music, right? And then here in Ukraine, it's basically American music, and they do some pop Russian Ukrainian, and now because of the problems with Russian Ukraine, there is some more going into like traditions of Ukraine, people speaking Ukrainian and all that stuff. And sometimes they have here they actually like music from Georgia a lot. Like for some reason they really love the food and they love the music there too. So there is a little bit more of fusion. But I always find that like music. But then in Brazil, whenever people say, "Oh, so like send me some tunes like from this place or that place," because they're just listening because it's, I don't know, Pedro suggested, right? They don't have that context that sometimes we have. That is, are you going to this specific party and then there is this person playing here, or you go to like Drum Taberna that exists in Toronto and other places. You have the context in which you learn in which you are exposed to the music makes a difference, I think, and I think knowing the musicians also makes a difference. That the people that are doing this, exploring these traditions, they are, I don't know, travelers as the audience. And when you get together, it's such a. That's why I got this segue from the meditation aspect, because whenever you're in a context of getting all these instruments and all these interesting people like doing, you go from a very like mellow piece to this language you've never heard of to, I think it just changes the environment. And I'm trying to think of how to do those things on a virtual world as well, to have those experiences. I think those live shows, they probably will bring something to the table. Like,
Yeah. But also the thing about live when you're there in person, which we can't be now, is the human energy and the
yeah,
fact that the artist kind of helps you come like become part of the thing.
right, and
Like
feeling it.
a good front person will show you will like but also like so when you go see a music when you go see music and there's people there, you can see in the artist, and they will guide you through the process too. That's a big part. And the energy, and also
Right.
the energy you give them, and they will throw that back out you too. The whole idea of a live, live performance is a whole different.
Yeah, yeah.
It's kind of like church.
It is for sure. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
certainly a search of the transcendent for sure. And
And if you look at it like the way I looked at church when I was a kid, you're not going to get much from it.
right, exactly. Yeah. Have you actually? That's a good point, because I think we're both very like probably very like skeptical. We're both spiritual and skeptical at the same time. Like, but how do you feel like? Because one of the things that happened to me, at least coming like here and seeing like the Orthodox Church, well, like Russian Orthodox, which came from the Greek. So I see a lot of art, and then I say, "Oh, this is so much like in Greek style." But then they made their own with even the Cyrillic alphabet, which was literally invented. And whenever I go to those places, I always think. And in Toronto, we had this opportunity to play at churches sometimes, right? But you have like this feeling that like, oh, I get what people were like getting at certain points in history, that beautiful
Yeah.
music.
Well,
And
the thing about church in Greece and the Orthodox Church,
mhm,
which I'm not the biggest fan of,
of course,
is that at some point it served the purpose of what I think church
should be
should be a community,
right.
bringing together the community. And I mean that's my opinion,
Yeah, of course, yeah.
but that's the biggest reason for church for me. It's like to bring the people together, and together they can work out their problems,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah,
So church did that for Greeks when we were under Turkish occupation, and also at school. Like even when my mom was growing up in the villages in Greece, if you had a question, you would go to the priest, because the priest was the one that went to school and he got educated,
hmm,
and he had education. So like if you're wondering like about something about life, or they would probably be better informed. So they were a source of information, they were a source of teachers. And
right.
the religious part was what kind of brought the common it's almost like a laws, like the laws. It's like we agree on these specific rules, and that's why we're a community, and
Hmm.
that's where the people go to there for to seek for wisdom, whatever you want to call it, because they actually knew more than like if you were a shepherd that and you some people can read,
Hmm.
and you had to fill out the papers for the government, you go to the priest because he can write.
Right.
And that's the purpose of what the church is. But like the thing is that purpose gives you power and
Yeah.
money. And maybe the priest that's in the village is a very nice person that just wants to help his villagers and whatever, and it's good. And the community brings the community together, and it brings the community a voice. What ends up happening is this wealth trickles to the top,
Hmm.
and it creates corruption, and it creates all these other things, and it creates power and control, and it turns into this ugly thing of what I think it is now,
Right.
you know, and mistrust, and then you lose the community. So now it's no longer a community-based thing, but it's a power-hungry machine that wants access to government.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that's a terrible thing, you know.
Yeah.
But it all starts from the need to people to connect.
Right. Huh.
in the essence of it, and they need we need to have a set of agreements as people that we can come together and be like, okay, we can be different, disagree with some things, but these are the common things that we all agree on. You know, if we can agree on them together, we can call that a religion, and then
Hmm.
we can gather together and in these principles try to better our lives.
Right. Yeah.
But is that religion or is that philosophy? What is that?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's one of those things that it serves so many multiple like purposes, right? It's I guess it evolved in a way to in human societies to fulfill all these needs of reassurance and teaching and this practical things, and at the same time this I guess connection with even entertainment, like we like you were talking about this old times when people like couldn't even write. They didn't have even I don't know sometimes even like electricity, or if they're going to make music, sometimes they would or they would sing at home or those things. But whenever you would see a spectacular thing, would be in a church environment, right? And then you have the small ones, and then the really huge psychedelic ones that had the. When would you see like a painting if not on a church setting? So it's different today, and I think not to get too much into that subject, but one of the things that I was thinking the other day, because I went to a couple of Ukrainian Orthodox churches because I really like the art, and whenever I walk there, I always daydream of what would be as a venue for community, as you're saying, like you want to learn music, you want to learn about certain like different things, or a place where you can go hang out and I don't know, playing instruments and have like drinks, sort of like what a bar is in a way. But now I think it's all separated in our society. Like you want to read something, you go to the library. You want to do a show, you go to the bar. You want to rehearse, you go to a specific other place. But I think it's kind of cool to have this beautiful place where you can do all those things and maybe take the
Like a
like
community
dogma part
center?
out of it. Yeah, just the community part. I was walking around and always, whenever I go into churches, is the first thing I see. It's like all those high ceilings and different corners. Maybe you can like get someone playing
But
there.
yeah,
Like maybe we'll get
the
there
thing about
sometime.
the church too is that they have the church is a church that
Yeah,
has money. So if you have money and you fund the arts, you're gonna make good art. Like
right.
that thing that you go in the church and you look up and you're like, "Whoa,
Whoa.
that looks amazing." Well, that guy got paid.
Yeah.
He got paid well, and he was a good artist that was
Huh.
making a living. He
Right.
studied it, he put time, and then the church paid him, and he did something beautiful for them. You know,
Yeah.
same as music, like all these organ players, the classical music. They funded
But
church funded classical music for still does, I guess,
yeah.
in the organ. You know, there's
Yeah.
money. There's money. It's the same as the courts. Like, do I like royalty? I do not at all.
Yeah.
Just make just
Yeah.
sure everybody knows I do not like royalty. But
I second that. I
you
agree.
second that,
Yes,
great.
it's a silly thing. Yes.
But a lot of courts funded a lot of great music. Why is Ottoman music like written down? And so because the
Saved it.
courts they
Yeah.
funded composers to write and create, and that's the importance of funding for the
Right.
arts. Because when you fund the artists, then the artists can create culture, and that's gonna keep your identity and whatever in the way you want to.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
not necessary. Music is gonna happen no matter what. It's just when you fund it, then the artists are able to work on a different level. I guess that's not the proper word, but you understand what I'm saying.
No, for sure. I think it's
Fun.
yeah. Like without, I have this conversation sometimes. It's so interesting. I like sometimes to talk to people that are, for example, one of my best friends is like an accountant, financial advisor, and he's a super like right wing person. And so I always like to talk to him about that. And I find that people forget, just like in music. But one example that is easy is that most of the science that was created in the world, that even saving everybody today, like and the reason why we're talking and everything, those things they came from the like government, sometimes even churches, like or like like governments or at least the community in a way saying this is worthwhile to pursue, like go explore the cosmos, and then sometimes we'll find things that we can use in our lives. And it's not like let's try to invent a television in 1500s. We will not.
Yeah.
But because of the accumulated knowledge we have. And with music it's sort of the same thing. You can build a hut or you can build a cathedral, and the only way to actually make those amazing things and make a generation that can devote themselves to doing that depends on that support. And sometimes it's yeah, to me it's so difficult to tell, like sometimes people, it's like, oh, they should work on, like especially for musicians, like, oh, without funding they should just go and try to to end. We can't sell music because there is a corporations that before it was how do you call it, record labels and people that would monopolize the distribution, and then they would basically have just a few people, so you didn't have a long tail of music being produced. Today being produced so much more music, and so amazing music, especially because people start learning from different places. But then if you are a super, like you got 1 million views on, I don't know, Spotify or like whatever, like a streaming service, you get a fraction of that money. So you have to go and tour, and even on touring, it's always difficult. So it's an interesting time to have a way
but
to.
also keep in mind also that one thing I wanted to say is that all these things, the church, that they invested in music and art, they didn't do it out of the goodness of their heart.
Yeah, it's propaganda.
They did because when you enter a chapel, like a beautiful chapel, majestic paintings, the architecture is just breathtaking. Yeah. And then you hear amazing music written by a genius like Bach or something. Yeah. That experience is going to be a whole way different than if you go to like an empty room with no one in there, you know, and you just get a guy being there being like, do this, do that, do that, do that, you know. Right. They did it. They knew what they were doing. They didn't do it. They knew that by investing in the arts and investing in music, they were going to bring the people in. Right. Too. Anyway, it's a long conversation.
Yeah, no, but it's an interesting thing. Music. For sure, yeah, and that's why I wanted to do this and get these thoughts from people. And the funny thing is that sometimes I know you for like a few years, and we certainly talked about a lot of things related to music, but we don't really sit down and talk for like an hour about like these things that are sometimes very near and dear to our hearts, and then we don't really go and let me explain to you why I do this. Let's just jam, let's just talk. So in a way, it's like a philosophical jam, so I appreciate it. Before we go, let me tell me what, where people should go to find you. You're going to put lower thirds and everything in show notes and all those things. I'll put it on YouTube and everywhere. But where is the best place for people to go find your stuff?
So there's a few different things that I'm doing right now. If you're into kind of more traditional folky, like not folky, but we have Kune, which I mentioned before. Kune is a group that we're working with. I'm musical director of this group.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's new.
Maybe half
a year. Yeah. Like I was not there, so I don't know. So congratulations.
And we have our first album, which is it was a while ago, so it's not very representative right now. But if you live in Toronto, we're supposed to play in May, but I think the show is now in August. And there's another group that I play with called Mosquito Bar, which is also kind of like a fusion of, but still folky. There's a group, if you're more into, I don't know, I don't want to say, it's not more complicated structures, I guess. More instrumental music. There's a group I play called Near East Trio, which is great for that. And the last thing that I'm working on, which is my passion project that I work on with my wife, is called Catch Fire. And we do a mixture of electronic music with, sometimes I'll bring some stuff from world music stuff like percussion, and but it's very electronic based. So if you like more party party times.
Mm-hmm.
It's also like a great way for two people to create a sound, like a huge sound in their own living room. So that's what I'm working. We have a new EP out, so
Oh, that's cool. I didn't know that
it's
one.
on
Cool.
Spotify.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
Catch Fire, and we're working on
Catch
a
fire.
new album now.
Oh, cool. All right. All right. That's amazing. Cool. So, any last thoughts, words, any last thing? Suggestions? No, I think we're good. I think we're good. I think you have.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
you have stuff.
I have stuff. Yeah, no, it's really cool. I really appreciate you like taking the time. We haven't talked in a while,
Yeah,
so
man.
it's good to catch up and catch up in front of an audience, possibly. So no, but I really appreciate it. It's really cool that you're doing. We'll get Lauren to come up in the show and talk to her too and see what she's doing. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what you're doing with the electronic stuff. It's something that I'm interested in trying to get into, especially because of this idea that you can do big sound with less people and still be very. I really liked what you said about being. How do you say? How did you use abstract or like more like in like?
The one thing I would say about about electronic music
Mm-hmm,
is, like any kind of music, it takes time to learn about it and to be able to use it. So a lot
mm-hmm,
of people that come from more traditional instruments, they dive in a little bit and they get overwhelmed, and then because the abstractness of it,
mm-hmm,
because you can do anything you want, which is the worst thing that can happen to you.
mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, it's in every single art
You
form.
don't want to be able to do anything you want. Never want to be able to, because you don't know what you want.
Yes. Yeah. And then you could
Yes,
go anywhere and then it becomes a infinite source of procrastination.
exactly.
But cool.
So that's
Awesome.
all I would say is get some software and start
Start playing around.
now,
Cool. Awesome.
tonight.
Okay. Yes, sir. Yeah. Cool. Demi, thank you so much. I
Okay,
appreciate
buddy.
it.
Yeah, man.
Thanks. Yay. Cool.